CJSF 90.1 FM Burnaby, the campus community radio station of Simon Fraser University. We stream online at cjsf.ca. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and listen to podcasts of CJSF programs on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/CJSF radio.
Radio.
Yeah, mystery surrounds us. Mystery all around us.
Welcome to Essential Conversations. I'm your host, Rebecca Mears, with my co-host,
Luca Hallex.
We are very delighted to have an old friend joining us in the studio today, somebody who is actually coming around for the second time. We first had Kat Thorsen on our show, I think the first few months that we were airing here.
That was the 17th episode.
Oh, well, look at you. You got all the numbers
I have
ready.
it at my
everything.
fingertips.
Yes. And so she came, and of course, whenever we have somebody on our show, we're interested not just in what they're doing, but who they are. Why them? Why that? Why now? Why not someone else? Why not something else? So we got to learn about Kat then, but we also were hearing about her project Sock Monkey. And
at that time, yeah.
At that time. But she's got something really delicious that she's just launched, and we're so thrilled that we were able to match up her launching with our schedule for the show and have Kat join us today to talk about a new online graphic novel, historical novel really, series that she has launched called Molly, A True Crime Analysis. And I'm so glad you could make it, Kat.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back.
Yes, it's lovely. And this time you're actually in studio with us instead of on the phone, which is...
Yeah, and we've got all this loot spread out in front of you that
She's shown up with this big carrying case, almost briefcase sized. A little bit smaller than a briefcase, but, a plastic carrying case. And it's opened up, and we've got paraphernalia that is historical, that is artistic.
creative goodies, right?
Yeah.
Because Kat travels with creative goodies because she's an artist.
Yes. So you've done very well by the show and tell request
Like
today.
my family would call me a hoarder, but artistic
the
hoarder.
have to hoard because otherwise how do you have materials to work with,
Thank
right?
you. I feel justified. I feel justified.
Yes.
So, Kat, can you please give our listeners a bit of background as to... Let's start with, how did you even first connect with the essence that is the story of Molly?
Well, it takes me back to 2003. And my dad, interestingly enough, I wrote a book with my dad called Drawn Together. And Luca, who's here, came up with that title. And a really great workshop that we did.
Because it's punny.
Yeah, that's right. And it just worked too well. But anyway, my father was very close to me, very important to me. And one of the wonderful things that he did was he read the newspapers every day, the Province and the Sun, every day, meticulously. And then he would cut out articles for all his kids in the family. So he would find articles that pertained to my interests, and then he'd put them in an envelope and always give them to me.
So he was sort of an archivist.
Very much.
In a way.
Very natural archivist. And, the photograph albums that we have and all his stuff that we've gone through since he passed away is just profound. And I think I inherited the love of archiving from him, collecting. And because it's so important to keep those objects, to me it is anyway, because we are able to tell stories like this one.
And there's an active process in archiving. It's not just a jumble of things, right? It's things that have been brought together in a particular configuration to do something, to
Absolutely.
show something, to explore something, to market in history, whatever.
Exactly. And most of my interests are about things that are very, very historical. So in August 2003, Dad cut out an article from the Vancouver Sun, and it was about a lecture that was going to be held at the Vancouver Public Library. The book award had just been the Vancouver Book Award, and it was called Stanley Park, and it had won the book prize that year. And then along with in the book, there was a thin thread about a cold case, a mystery, a Vancouver mystery called The Babes in the Wood. And that sort of fed throughout the book. And so they thought it would be interesting as part of the lecture to talk about the actual case. So they brought in a retired homicide detective who was very, very attached to the case. And he did
the one that was never really solved to his satisfaction, right?
That's right, yeah. And so he was there to talk to the community about it and to really see what kind of answers he could get by just telling the story. And it was an unsolved cold case that was at that time 50 years old. So at that time, I was actually studying criminal profiling and behavior evidence analysis and criminal behavior, and I was really fascinated by the dark side of human nature, and it was just a passion of mine, but also my studies. And so I thought, ooh, that would be really cool. I took the article from Dad, dragged Mom to the lecture. We sat in the front row, and then at the end, I went up and asked, "Can I volunteer with you to help you research your cold case?" And that was with that retired homicide detective, and he said, "Absolutely." And so the rest is history. I got drawn into a small task force called the Babes in the Woods Task Force. It was amazing experience, and through that, I helped them research their lead and really put together a profile for them. And that was sort of for a year's journey. And then that brought me into my story now, because as I was researching their lead and working with these incredible people, like a forensic odontologist, a retired journalist, a radio reporter, and this detective, I pursued their lead to the utmost. They allowed me access to the BC archives, to the Vancouver Police Museum's physical evidence boxes about this case, all sorts of things. During that, I put together information for them that kind of proved that their lead was dead. Mm-hmm. And so that was an interesting turnaround. So I put together that information, presented that, but in the meantime, because I had all this access, I was putting together a profile of who the person who had committed the crime might have been. We can talk about what the crime was, but I needed to start from this crime scene and work my way out. And as I did that,
what was known?
Yeah,
that
what was
known for
only
sure,
known,
right?
and I really wanted to stick to the facts, but also develop sort of an image of who that person might have been, and that's what I did. And as I did that, because I had access to archives and records and things like that, I found some really interesting information, and that led me to put together a profile of a woman, and then I discovered a story about a young woman that really fit that profile. And so that's what my work is about. But I guess we should say what the case was.
Go ahead. I'm
That's
actually
the
pulling it up
lead-in.
on Wikipedia here so that I can share just a quick link on Twitter for people to follow. By the way, anybody who's listening, if you'd like to track along with some of the things that we're saying, do come and follow us on Twitter. It's at Essential Conv, spelled Essence, TIALCONV. So I'm sending out some links there so that you can follow up on the things that Kat is talking about. Please tell us about the Babes in the Woods.
Yeah, so that case, I had actually never heard of it before, but a lot of Vancouverites had. And this particular retired detective, this was his passion project because he had heard about it throughout his childhood. And what had happened was that on January 14th, 1953, there was a Parks Board worker in Stanley Park working with his team, clearing leaves and, I don't know what exactly they were doing. They were clearing paths and things like that. In a particular area at the Eagle and Chickadee Trail in Stanley Park. And he stepped on something, looked down, and you'd think that in this day and age, now we would be shocked. But for him, it wasn't shocking to discover a skull. He had discovered a human skull. He kind of shrugged his shoulders, was very busy, went to work, went home, kind of went, I think I better, tell somebody. And because it was post-war, people had, lived in the park, passed away. So the next day he did tell the mounted squad there. And
the mounted squad is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
It's actually Vancouver Police Department.
Oh, it's the Vancouver Police Department.
And they're still active.
Neat.
And Stanley Park, for anybody who's listening from outside the Vancouver area, is almost part of our downtown. It's a big protected natural area that has seawall all around it, and then parklands in the middle, forest. and it's been there for a long time, and we're famous for having that park so close to the
It's been voted one of the top
city.
parks in the world, I believe, just this past year, and it's one of my favorite places on the planet.
Yeah.
And so in the mounted squad found out about it, they came and investigated, and as they uncovered the scene, it turned out to be 2 children. So skeletal remains of 2 children, and that, of course, sent a shockwave. That's absolutely shocking. So
one was bad enough, but 2.
Yeah, and the fact that they were children as well, right? Yeah, and so they did pretty meticulous good work, and taking off the leaf layers, looking at the evidence at the scene. What were the objects at the scene? What could they tell from those objects? And so these small skeletons appeared to be a boy and a girl, and then they were clothed. The clothing was obviously very rotted away, but they were clothed in tartan kind of jackets, very similar clothing. Their underwear was too big. It had been taken in with like a safety pin. They had cavities in their teeth. Their heads were covered in little those aviator helmets that kids were wearing during the war. Very, sort of that typical fashion of the time. Their shoes were there. There was one woman's shoe tucked in between them. They were lying head to toe, almost placed. And then there was a lunch kit, an old lunch kit that had something inside. There was some talk about that might have been an old coloring book. And there was a hatchet at the scene, and the hatchet fit the markings on the backs of the heads of these skulls, and therefore they thought these children were killed. They didn't die there. They didn't freeze to death.
Were killed there.
Yeah, they might have been killed there, or they might have been placed there, but who knows, right? And the woman's shoe there. But then at the time, they thought they were covered with a raincoat, but it turned out actually to be the lining of a fur coat. The fur was lying downward. So these children were lying head to toe under a fur coat. And so at the time, the headline said that they felt that a mother had killed her children and left them there and left the scene.
Wow.
So that was the cold case. And they did vast research worldwide. They found a lot of children alive that were missing. They checked all the missing files. Nothing came forward. And to this day, they don't have any idea who those children are.
Wow.
Yeah.
And oh man, I had a question. Now it just disappeared. Never mind. Hate when that happens.
So you got interested in this, and you did this profiling for them. And then what made you decide to take this further?
Well, yes, I found it absolutely fascinating to strip away everything that was assumed and just look at the evidence at the scene. And as I looked at the evidence at the scene, I started to understand why it happened. It was a weird feeling. I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. So, I could empathize, sympathize. People were calling her a monster, but I felt there was something about that scene that was different. The fact that they were laid that way, the fact that the fur coat was left there. There was some disagreements on the task force for sure as to the motive of the crime. We can't say for sure that it was a woman that did it, and those are assumptions, but from the behavior that you see from the evidence at the scene, it feels like it was a woman. It feels like it was a woman by herself, and it feels like it was an act of altruism. Like there was something was so bad in this woman's life that this was the only option. And so to me, I really felt that was, so I wanted this to be more than just identifying the kids. I wanted to find out why. And because there was a real sort of vibe about the task force that we need to find out who these kids are. But it's like, no, like I just felt this passion to find out who this woman was. And so
which comes out of the profiling, right? Because you were already exploring who might have done this and why might they have done this and what might their mindset have been at the time.
And really using the techniques that I was learning from Brent Turvey, who's renowned, and using his text, using his courses, and really trying not to make any assumptions. And ironically, as you strip away and not make assumptions, this real beautiful story starts to develop. And so I started looking at I did. It was just something took me. Passion. I don't know. And it was before I started looking at an artistic twist on it. And so I started looking at what was happening with women at the time. What is happening with women in post-war Vancouver? It's an impoverished time. It's a violent time. A lot of PTSD. And what would make someone decide
Now,
that?
they were discovered in 1953, but when did they, after having analyzed this on a forensic level, when do they assume that these children would have died?
So they by the leaf layers, they felt maybe 6, 7, 8 years previously.
So it would have been just after the war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it would be definitely around 47, 48, 49. Lots of different time frames have been given. I have my own, for sure. Certainly comes into this, the project that I'm working at, but it feels like, it would be about 6 or 7 years, just judging by the way that they had deteriorated. And it's called forensic taphonomy, is the study of what happens to remains in different environments. And so this environment was a nature forest environment. And so because they were
particular rates of decay in that kind of environment, right?
Yeah, and so you can start to build a story around that too. Why then? Why were the kids wearing winter clothes? Okay, so, you start to feel it was cold. There was a fur coat at the scene. It's cold. That's not summertime, right? So it's all these, you can start, and what about that lunchbox? It was a two-handled lunchbox. They weren't making one-handled boxes till after 1947, 1948. So it's like all these beautiful little details that you can form from it. As I started researching that, and then I presented to the task force my evidence that their lead was dead. The doors closed, and I knew that the time was up. And so then I had all this information about my particular theory, and that's when I started writing about it and knowing that I'm not a police officer, and I'm an artist and a mother. That was kind of the feeling. What do I do with this information?
Insatiably curious.
And insatiably curious.
Well, yeah.
And really passionate about the human condition. Yeah. And so I just started writing. But the first manuscript it's thick. It is I don't know, it's that 3 inches or something, 4 inches of court-worthy documentation.
Wow.
And so then I started sending that around, and I was starting to get these rejection letters, and it's like, oh, what is this? What is this? And I kept researching, and then all of a sudden this insatiable desire to illustrate it came out, and that's sort of what has fostered in the last 13, 14 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been part of my life.
It's been a long journey.
It's like coming together of all of these interesting, your life story, which is not an average life story, right? Your combination of skills is not a usual combination of skills. And then you have this unsolved case that is nuanced and complex and at a very interesting time in Vancouver history, let alone Canadian and world history, that it's like I love that synchronicity of what comes together when. And what would drive you, because you are an artist.
Exactly.
And this is one of the things that artists bring to the process of human life that is different than what a scientist would bring, or
it's interesting, and it's interesting to me too, because I have a Bachelor of Science, and and I've studied art, I've studied psychology.
An interesting combination.
So it's all of a sudden I found a project that takes all my passions, because I just love all studying everything, and then all of a sudden this has to do with everything. It also has a lot to do with the work that I've been doing for years and years with vulnerable populations, in particular youth, and all these incredible students. Whoever's listening out there, I love you all, because you've taught me so much about the human condition and the choices that we make. And so, it's been a long project. It still is a project, but it's the right time now. I've always fought again, when is the right project? I've had these dream romantic ideas that a publisher will sweep me off my feet and say, here's 2 years worth of income, I'll see
Go
you.
ahead and write.
I'll see you in 2 years.
Or draw or whatever.
But it's just has this life of its own, but all these things have been happening over the last 14 years that it wasn't the right time. Yeah.
And
so
now it is
now
the
I'm
right
starting
time.
to release it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like it's time to play one of your songs.
Okay.
And let's play the one that goes along with your first episode. What are you calling the
Yeah, so I'm kind of talking. Yeah, it's a weekly, like the
serial, yeah.
the project is an online book now instead of waiting to publish it. So I'm doing it as a weekly serial, almost like a visual podcast.
Yeah.
And because I love podcasts, but this is a visual only with audio. So I'm kind of playing with it. So part 1A was released last Sunday, and the way that it was released,
Because that was
that was the anniversary of the discovery of the skeletons, or the anniversary of the headlines.
Yes.
And so I choreographed the illustrations to music because I used to be a dancer, so that's bringing that into
Another aspect.
And it was a
Yeah.
really interesting process for me. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to work, but it seems to. So this song is pretty important to the whole piece because it is called "The Babes in the Wood."
Yes, it is.
Sung by Irene Dunn.
All right. So I'm tweeting a link out right now so people can look at the serial,
visual.
look at the watch, and they can connect into the YouTube song there as well. So they don't have to be doing this right at the same time as us. But when you get to the link, you will see that she's got that Kat has embedded in there this same song that we're going to play now, and then you can follow along with the story as you listen to it. And I found it emotionally a roller coaster while I read it, but it's also witnessing and honoring what the story was, right? So here we go. We're going to take a listen to Babes in the Woods. Where are you? Here it is by Irene Dunn, and we shall rejoin Kat in the studio in just a couple of minutes.
When the babes were lost in the gloomy wood, it's no wonder they were so awfully good. 14 angels were watching them, so all the storybooks stayed. Sandman's coming, and it is growing late. Give me your hand, here where we stand. We're off to slumberland. With you I'll go, we've no angel chorus watching over us. Moonlight is bright, kiss me goodnight, just like a brother should. I'll put on my little hood, and we'll both be all so good, like the babes in the wood. Give me your hand, here where we stand. We're off to slumberland. With you I'll go, we've no angel chorus watching over us. Moonlight is bright, kiss me goodnight, just like a brother should. I'll put on my little hood, and we'll both be oh so good, like the babes in the wood, like the babes in the wood.
21st Century Promotions presents the 21st Century Flea Market. This European-styled collector's market will consist of 175 vendors offering bargain items, collectibles, and memorabilia. The event will take place in the Croatian Cultural Center at Commercial Drive on Sunday, the 22nd of January, between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. For more information, visit 21cpromotions.com or call 604-980-3159.
You're listening to CJSF 90.1 FM Burnaby. Welcome back to Essential Conversations. I'm your host, Rebecca, with my co-host, Luca Hallex, and we have Kat Thorsen in the studio with us, and we just listened to Irene Dunn singing Babes in the Woods, and that was directly connected with the topic of conversation today, which is Kat's new serial online historical graphic novel called Molly, A True Crime Analysis. And we need to talk about why it's called Molly.
Yeah, so I'm doing it as it's not a secret that the woman that I discovered as I went along, because I wanted to, is named Molly, right? I wanted to, as I said, like I placed myself at the scene and I wanted to move my way outward. And if I was a mother who had killed her 2 children, I don't think I would have lived very long after myself. I would have committed suicides. That was my thought.
Yeah, you don't sacrifice your children so that you can live. You do it the other way around, if anything.
And
right?
so things that will come up in my serial episodes, Luca just came up with the wonderful term, episodes, is a date that was kind of anchored and that the police felt was legitimate because of an eyewitness, and we don't know if it's legitimate, but I decided to use that as an anchor point to start moving outward, because back then, in the 40s, 50s, suicides sadly were on the cover of the newspapers. That was a big reported thing. Right now, of course, we don't report about them. But back then, it was a sensational headline. So in a way, that helped me. So then I went to I have spent months and months and months and months and months in the Vancouver Public Library with the microfiches, going back and forth in the 40s, the 50s, back and forth, and really immersing myself in that era. But also, I wanted to start with that anchor point and move my way outward to see, were women committing suicides in the late 40s? Yes. So we can say yes. Why were they doing it? Are there any evidence, etc.? And so as I moved my way outward, I came across an article about a young woman who had, in fact, committed suicide on the Georgia Viaduct. And I don't want to give away too much.
Which is one of the major roads that goes through Vancouver.
That's right. Yes, exactly. And it was an interesting location, and I really get into, and I printed that article out because I wanted that as a proof that women were indeed committing suicide. That was all I really printed it out about. It was like a section of that court-worthy document book. And then there was a 3 a.m. wake-up where it was just like, holy... I just remembered a lead that I had read about that had the name. And so then I printed it out, and that became the source of my research. And then this young woman, all I knew about her was that she jumped from the Georgia Viaduct and that she had an address. And from there, it's 13, 14 years later, I've mapped out her entire life through research. That can be through internet research, archive research, anything and everything. And it's bizarre what you can find out. That's a lot of what this project really means to me as well, is that it's, yes, I want to try to identify those children. Yes, I want to talk about this woman that I've discovered. Yes, I want to illustrate it and share it with the world. But really, what can we find out about a person from one little headline? Right. And I know when she was born, where she was born, when she came to Canada, where she moved back and forth, what she died. It's unbelievable, and it's really exciting. So that's kind of the process. So the work itself, which is this weekly serial, is really about slowly intertwining the two timelines of the Babes in the Woods case, of what I know, and her life. And then I want the reader to kind of see, is this interesting? Because to me, it's really interesting. So it kind of goes tick, 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 click, click. And that over time, so by the end of these 46 weeks that I've planned out, there's 23 parts, and each part has 2 sections. By the end of that, I want to hear what the readers have to say in terms of the synchronicity, how the timelines intertwine.
And what they think.
Yeah.
And also, everybody who lives in the city has their own history in the city or elsewhere, which may also bring out more information and shed more light on this than you've even been able to do so far, because you would have that many more eyes and ears and
it's beautiful.
And family histories. Right?
Well, and it was
and
a lovely moment. A lovely moment happened because I had this really interesting discussions. I'm very diplomatic, but with the task force about the motive. And there was a lot of talk about a party girl and the fact that, this woman would have killed her kids to go party. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And it
doesn't lend itself
really
to that, right?
So, yeah,
because
it doesn't.
It's so carefully done.
It's so careful. And also, why wouldn't she keep her fur coat if she was such a party girl? Anyway, it was an interesting dialogue that happened. And so for me, I really felt like, no, that, that if this was an act of filicide, and filicide means the killing of children, of your children, if that was an act, suicide would follow. However long. Through statistics, women who have killed their children tend to wait a while. Men who kill their families tend to kill themselves at the scene.
Right on the scene.
Whereas women tend to be 3 weeks later. It's really fascinating. But so there hadn't been any talk about the altruistic side of it. But I was doing drawing lessons at a senior residential home a few years ago. And I had talked about this, what I was working on as we were drawing, and these lovely ladies in the room were, a lot of them were raised in Vancouver, and one in particular, she was absolutely fascinating, remembered the case vividly when it broke in the news, which is amazing.
Because she was that era.
Yeah, and then she was the first person, she went, don't you think that mother committed suicide after that? I was like, hallelujah, okay, I'm on the right track. Because she had lived that era and she had read those headlines. So that was really cool.
And when this woman committed suicide, there would have been an autopsy because it was a suicide, right?
Yes.
And were suicides not still illegal at that time?
I would think so. Well,
so
certainly,
it was considered a crime.
It was considered a crime, and it was certainly considered a sin. And I've discovered where she's buried, and my mom and I did that. My mom and I worked on this together a lot, and we'd have picnics at Mountain View Cemetery. And she's in an unmarked grave. Now, there might be many reasons why her grave is unmarked, like, maybe there was no financial ability, but there could be other reasons as well. But it's interesting,
But she wouldn't be in a church graveyard at that time because it was a suicide.
Yeah.
So, there's a whole bunch of things that come together.
There's lots of interesting, tragic elements to it. This is the way that her timeline plays out, and the way that it intertwines with the era and the Babes in the Woods is a Shakespearean tragedy for sure. Like, it's sad and delicious and deep and bloody and human and
human.
It's really human. And so, and I have to do a shout out to my dear friend Matthew Roy, who's a writer in Toronto, and he's the one that, because my research is so massive, and so are the amount of art that I've done. And, I have a cart, like one of those moving carts at home that all my boxes sit on, because it's like women and children second, all this stuff out first in case of fire. Yeah. And all my family knows this. It's like there's probably 8 banker boxes and, piles of stuff. And how do you organize that? And I reorganized it. The first manuscript was this way.
This is an exhibit for a museum.
It's
for a special.
It's intense. But it was my friend Matthew Roy who suggested the 5-act structure, not the 3-act structure of storytelling, and the Shakespearean structure. And when we did that, when I laid that out, that triangle of Act 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the rising act, it was just dynamite in terms of finally organizing it. So who knows if the end result will totally follow a 5 acts, but it helped me organize everything into a story.
And anybody who's ever worked on a massive project knows that one of the pivotal moments is when you figure out what system to place into the material so that everything has its place.
Yes.
and then you can start working with it. Up until then, it's an overwhelming mass that is somewhat chaotic, not because the material is chaotic, but because you don't know how to organize it yet.
Yes, exactly.
So this
so
gives
true.
it, and you could organize it in any number of different ways, but it's about, when you're looking at it from an artistic sense, you're trying to find the way that feels right for you as the artist to be able to move the material and start making sense out of it. Right?
Exactly. And, you know, it's been a real shift and transformation in terms of once I got that organizational ability, then I could feel more comfortable dismantling everything, because I knew everything still had a place to go to as I reorganized. But also, you know, letting go of my preconceived notion of what the audience should be. Initially, it was the reader. Initially, it was the publisher that would be working with me as with an editor, and there's still, I have sent this out to publishers. There was one that bit quite dramatically, but they didn't feel it was the right time for them, for the true crime thing. There was, you know, it's been sent to Hollywood. There's a pitch, a one-page pitch, very fascinating. But it was this Christmas that I thought, I can't wait anymore. I am so freaking sick of I'm not holding on to the story, because I'm working on it continuously. And there still has been more leads and more evidence that has come in the last few months, which is remarkable. But I was so tired of not telling the story. And I felt bad for this unbelievable support system that I have out there that keeps saying, we can't wait, we can't wait.
It had to hatch, right?
Yeah, and then it was like, oh my goodness, like, you know, then I thought the obstacle was, I don't have enough money to do it. The obstacle was, I don't have a publisher. And then it was this aha moment a few weeks ago, kind of where I sat and raged at Molly and said, what do you want from me? Where it was just, oh my God, I love working online. I love blogging. I love...
It's the great equalizer, right?
And
we
I love
can't be held down.
Slowly,
we can
and
say, I have a voice,
and I need
here's
to
what I need to
rework
say.
this book. I need to rework it in a way where I see it in a perspective, and that's where it became so doable and exciting, and now it's flowing. And Sunday I released the next part, which is all about the headlines from 1953, but it's just flowing on its own accord, and plus I've taken ownership of it fully. So people are accessing it for free, but that doesn't matter.
No.
Or actually it does
and
matter.
that may lead
it actually
to the
matters
next
a lot,
things, right?
because I want it to be out
proves
there.
that there's interest.
And if millions of people have read it and they don't want to read the end result book, that's a good problem.
I don't think that's what will happen. But
like if that's what
it
happens,
could be,
yeah. Like,
but I don't
nobody's
think so.
interested anymore. Oh, okay, that's good. So, but it's great, yeah.
It's the witnessing that you are providing for Molly, for these children, is so profound. The other day, after I had read your first episode, and then having known you and listened to you talk about this journey and the discoveries that you have made and the connection that you have made across time, distance, space, all of this with these real, living, breathing humans that form the basis of this story, you are integrally a part of this now. Your presence and your interaction with their story is
You're
a
one
part
of the characters
story.
in the story now.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Yeah, and part 2 is called Why Me?
Awesome.
Because I need to, it was interesting, like the one-page pitch that I had to write for someone who was interested in a movie version of this. I wrote a pitch about Molly, and I wrote a pitch about the kids, and they said, this
No,
is
it has
about
to
you.
be, why are you telling this
so like,
story?
oh my God, I'm Clarice
Because
Starling
part of
from
the story
Silence
is
of the
how
Lambs.
you've uncovered it all, right? It isn't
true.
just the story, it's how you found the
Yeah,
story.
it's my
And
involvement.
this is social history.
It's true, and it's so that took a long time for me because I'm not. You two know me very well. I don't
You're
do
not
selfies.
looking for the
No,
don't do
no,
selfies.
Very few people know what I look like, and if a photo sneaks in, it's like it's like wow, we saw the Sasquatch. We have discovered what she looks like. So I'm not. I don't place myself. So initially, it was written as a very removed third person thing. Now,
But that's how it had to start.
It had
right?
to start that way, and now it's I. And I really feel, even though I'm a scientist,
Yeah.
I do love to think about magic, but there was that moment when I was going through those archives. So I'm sitting at the Vancouver Public Library, which is located right by the Georgia Viaduct. I really felt that there must have been a moment where Molly's soul just went whoosh and said, "You're doing this." That's what I want to honor, the reason that she chose me.
Well, I was going to say to you, did the police ever pull a psychic in on this? Because I know that they occasionally do when it's a cold case, and they have run out of any other way to
They
solve
do,
it.
and that's certainly not court worthy. So it's not something that
they don't
is
usually report that they have.
and they did,
Right.
but also my mom, one of my mom's dear friends up north, came down and did. So my brother, who is meticulous at filming everything, my younger brother Frederick, filmed it. It's a fascinating. I will put it on the site.
Oh, I would love to
it's
see
really, really interesting. I'm trying to make everything that I place in the story in terms of facts factual, and then the art part and those kind of things becomes the creative magic realism part of it. But there's no doubt that psychics, people who identify as intuitives, give a perspective because they have an understanding of the human condition.
Well, and they can sometimes point to where you could search.
Absolutely.
So that, because if you
open your
got
eyes,
limited
right?
resources and you don't want to waste them,
Yeah.
then it's, without, otherwise you'd just be taking a stab in the dark, right? So it can give you a place to start.
When we have a story that we hold on too tightly to it, right? You have to bring in those other perspectives.
I love this combination of the factual side of it and the obsession and focus and myopia that you have to pursue something like this. But then you're still living your life, and you have to keep doors and windows open into other things so that since some serendipity can come in, like when you were working with these older ladies
Yes,
who grew up
exactly.
in that era. So then something walks in and it gives you another piece.
Because there have been times
where
where
combination of the two,
it's incredible
right? That they dance together.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of beautiful magic in this that I no doubt, like, there's something leading this. I always say Molly leads this. It's the one thing in my life that I don't push. Although I'm pushing it all the time, I'm working like hell on it.
Yes.
But I have to let this part of my life just unfold as it should. So, a few years ago, because of my financial situation and because I had been caregiving for my parents and I was completely overwhelmed financially, I had to declare bankruptcy. And it could have felt like a failure. It was definitely feeling like, oh, this is the worst thing could happen to a human being. Obviously, it isn't. And it was, and this incredible woman who was my, what is that called, trustee, said, you have the right to do this. And, because this is your Canadian right and you've worked really hard and obviously you were caregiving and all this stuff. So that was that lifted me. But at the same time, after this bankruptcy and I lost my condo, I started looking at weird places to live as if I was only allowed to live in a dingy basement suite. Yeah, it was very weird. And so then I discovered on Craigslist with my kids who were grown, but we were moving in together, a place half a block from Stanley Park. And I'm like, oh, God. Then I realized, wait a minute, it costs the same as everything else I've been looking at. So we went, and the landlord at the time, the manager, was an older gentleman. He was such a sweet man. He glowed, right? I swear, maybe he didn't even exist. He was just this magic man.
But maybe he was an earth angel,
yeah,
right?
he was an earth angel who knew about the story. And I was like thinking, there's no way we're going to get this because of my credit rating and all this stuff. And he knew about the story. He goes, you need to finish your book here. Oh, wow. And then I moved in, and it's
enough to make you
by
cry.
the park. And then there's moments I really feel like it's so magical. I love imagining. Because when I go to the crime scene in the park, I've taken a few people there. It's by Eagle and Chickadee. It no longer has the sad energy that it had for me before.
And nature does wonderful things.
Yeah, and it's beautiful because initially it was like, geez, this happened and this happened here. But now it feels like sometimes I envision and I'll dream about it that the boys are actually standing at the end of my lane holding hands and then slowly getting closer and closer.
So you said that originally that they thought it was a girl and a boy, and now you're saying the boys.
Yeah.
So they have they have ascertained that it was
That's
two
right.
boys.
So one of the men on the task force, Dr. David Sweet, is a forensic odontologist. I mean, he really is an expert at studying DNA and evidence through teeth.
Remains.
Yeah. So bite marks, DNA, the DNA pulp inside teeth. They really thought that there's no way that they could find DNA on these skeletons because they were so deteriorated, and there would be no nuclei anymore to dig that DNA out of. But they took the teeth from the skulls, and indeed they were able to do a profile, and the profile indicates that they were two boys. So that changed everything in 1998. So they really thought, eureka, we're going to solve this, because now we've been looking for a boy and a girl all these years, but still.
And did they know what race they were?
No,
They can't
didn't.
tell from the DNA.
No,
No.
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of interesting things that will come out in the serial
Yes, we
regarding
need to hold some back.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
but there's
Yes.
lots of details around who has the DNA reports right now and all this exciting stuff. It's very exciting. Yeah.
Wow.
And I imagine it was an intuitive process for you to decide what you were going to illustrate.
It just comes.
Yeah.
And the illustrations are pretty surreal in a sense. Like, I don't necessarily draw like an actual scene, although some of the stuff that came in the first part, I am not a typical comic book artist, that's for dang sure. I have a lot of comic book artists in my life who I admire immensely, and I was a bit fearful. That was my biggest fear, actually, releasing it, was I'm not a comic book artist, and so I'm just doing whatever I want to do. And then it's like, because I'm allowed to. So,
The
so that was
graphic
cool.
novel doesn't have to be
It doesn't.
comic.
So it's illustrations, really. And some are detailed, and some are sketches, some are embroidered, but they really just kind of come. Some are, like, yes, you see a person walking. Some are like filled with dead birds and weird stuff. So it's the illustrations become my take on it, I guess, or something to enhance the text. I took a course years ago at Emily Carr where the teacher, she was phenomenal, and she said an illustrator's job is to enhance the text.
Yes.
And it's not for the text to follow the illustrations. And so I'm trying to just let that happen. So it was kind of neat to start that first release. I really wanted it to be very text-free, except for the song, and then just let the visuals actually tell us the story. And then now this next part, we're digging right into what we knew in 1953. So it'll be more text-heavy, but it's kind of...
I'm curious to hear from you. Especially because you have brought with you here this big show and tell box case full of paraphernalia from I'm guessing the 40s, maybe
From
the 50s
that era.
as well.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier that part of your research was to immerse yourself in understanding what life was like for women at that time. Is there anything in here that you would like to share or pull out, or what specific observations would you like to share with us that contrast with life now?
Well, certainly. Well, because I really feel that this story is about an unwed mother and a mother who has committed suicide. So you got a double whammy in terms of sins there. It feels like a Catholic story. It feels like a secret, a family secret. There's no way that this could have been, these children would be unknown without a huge family secret kept very tight by family members. So some of this. So then, what I love to do, because I'm a collector, I do love to get objects and have that smell and that feel of the 40s and
it's evocative.
50, and so Etsy is like the best place for me to have researched all this stuff, because you just say 1940s and all this stuff. And so things like one wonderful thing that I found, or this actually I had ordered something else, and this guy said, you might be interested in this, so I sent you this as a gift, and it's the Menstrual Rhythm Guide to aid and to avoid conception. Like beautiful little objects like that, so we can feel and touch what it was like to, sit and twirl this little wheel here and try to figure it out as you're sweating and trying to go.
Trying to figure.
There's like a very lovely book, sort of lovely, called Legitimate Birth Control According to Nature's Law in Harmony with Catholic Morality from like 1934. Those kind of little things, like imagining that back then women would have been given this if you were
and
Catholic.
There was a morality meter somewhere.
Very much so. Leading to more secrets.
Yes.
Because something
because
had
anything
to make
that's
this
shameful, it would have been hidden, right?
This was about absolute running out of options. And running out of options meant financially.
You have to be that desperate to kill your own children.
Yeah. Incredible desperation. Yeah. And so then one of the things, too, is I have this incredible young friend called Jocelyn Louise who is so incredible, but I met her through my daughter, and I steal a lot of my daughter's friends, and and so, sorry, and so I met Jocelyn, and Jocelyn is beloved by photographers. She's great at posing, right, and just a natural
and photogenic,
very photogenic, and so I became a bit obsessed, like I do with people, and I did a lot of drawings of her because she just became this muse to me. And then I thought, oh my God, I should do some reference photos for the illustrations, get her to pose in different poses. But I thought, oh, I'd love to have her dressed in the right way, and so I found a fur coat that had the same dimensions on Etsy, which was remarkable, and it came in this box, and it was like, oh my God, like you're starting to recreate the scene. Then another friend of my daughter's, Jay Fisher, who is an incredible stylist, he volunteered his time to style Jocelyn's hair. So we thought, okay, we'll just we started to take this a little far, and so we styled her in the era, and we put on the fur coat, and she's covered in tattoos, and she is, like a remarkable, edgy woman. And then as she started to put this stuff on and her hair transformed, and she put on these clothes, and Molly walked out. It was unbelievable. And I knew I had my Molly. So Jocelyn is my Molly. And she's so giving to give herself to that. So I'm drawn her.
It's almost like acting, right? It's like she took the role on and walked it for you, so that you could.
And she really didn't know all that much about it initially, right? It was pretty much. And then our friend Rick Legal, who's a profound photographer, really great, took these unbelievable, beautiful pictures. And so it was great to recreate it. But I also needed more stuff. I mean, I've had hands-on experience with the physical evidence, and that's also on video, and that will appear, a detailed list of everything that was still remains as physical evidence in the archives. But there was one in particular that I thought, why didn't I steal that? Which would be terrible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't. Yeah. But it was the button from the fur coat. And I was obsessed with this button, obviously, with my connection to crafts. But it was this beautiful Bakelite button with tulips on it. I was obsessed. And so I drew it as I was sitting by myself at the Vancouver Police Museum. And then it just stayed with me. And I had been at the scene, so then I'm looking on Etsy for years, and then one day a similar button showed up.
I was going to say, a button like that must be fairly unique, especially if it's on a fur coat, right?
And so it's magic, right? Magic that would have come in the mail. It's a sacred button to me. It says everything, right? I don't know why, but it just says I'm at that scene and walking my way out and honoring whoever that woman was. Because, yes, there's a quote that I use, like, how do we respond to the archetype of the nurturant monster? Because people tend to call anyone who does this kind of a monster. But for me, what I'm interested in, certainly in all my work within custody centers and stuff, has been why.
Motivation. It's the motivation. Why would you do that? Yeah.
What are those decisions that people make in doing certain things? And that's what this whole thing is about, is why. And it's an honor to have been chosen to do it, for sure. I'm absolutely not. And it also feels so dang good to finally be telling the story, but in a way where it's just week to week, where I can rework it. And rework it. So, it's launched.
It's dynamic,
Sunday.
Right? Because
it's dynamic
because it's as you put stuff out, you're going to get stuff back.
And there are certain things in the works right now with things that are happening within the coroner's office and things like that may unfold during this year.
And so there's new science coming out,
keeps it very
new tools
flexible
for them to use, and as long as they still have the evidence, then they can go back and look again.
And then it's all about kind of creating my own version of a graphic novel, right? And I'm keeping all of it. There's a PDF link or a PDF page on it because I want it to also work as its own standalone book eventually, right? So
yes.
Well, this is another way in which you're breathing life back into this. This week by week is it's alive, because now we are expectant it's going to develop as we watch.
The phrase that comes to me is that they will not have died in vain. right? Because the more we can breathe life back into it and help to see why those circumstances could have produced such an act,
Yes.
the more we learn about ourselves in the present and what our motivations are,
Yes,
and how they're the same and how they're different, and will we want to do anything differently, see anything differently, appreciate anything differently as we move forward into our futures.
That's right. And you know, Molly is intertwined in the story. No idea if she's the mother, obviously, right? This is what this whole project is about.
But
is
there
just
was a mother.
illustrating,
Somewhere there was a mother.
and illustrating a woman of that time. But it certainly is awe-inspiring, the way that her timeline braids together with it. And a friend of mine says, so what if it turns out not to be Molly? And I'm like, well, then, you know, I've seen it to the end for her. Like, there's something about Molly chose me to tell her story for some reason. Also, then my friend, it was Matthew, the writer, he said, well, then you still have a crime to solve. Yeah, so
Well, I was going to say that because Molly did die, and she did have a story, whether it's this story or not.
That's right.
You know, you have pulled her story in
and
as well.
she deserves a headstone, and that's my goal at the end of this, to honor her, you know, in the fall with a headstone, and to, you know, eventually put a bench at the site or something, and to really honor those children. If we've identified them, that's amazing.
But if not,
just
they were still two children who
something-
died together.
And it's beautiful. And then so when I was thinking of the headstone, what do you write on a headstone besides her name and the year she was born, the year she died? And I thought, ooh, what do you write? Here's another like magical
come to
thing.
you. Yeah.
And it came because I was looking up, you know, Molly was Irish, so I was like, what do you Irish people write on headstone? You know, like always doing weird searches. And then this term Anam Cara came up, A-N-A-M, and then C-A-R-A came up. I was like, oh, what's that? And then it is a soul friend, but it also is a soul reaching out across time and space, connecting. And I'm like, oh, yep,
I
there
can
it
really
is.
relate to this because when I do readings, I pick
Yes.
up people
Right.
who are gone a lot. And they have very interesting things to say, and not necessarily things we would expect them to say.
That's right. And so that's what definitely would be on her headstone is Anam Cara. Our mutual friend, Kat Webb, is always telling me, you're a psychopomp, you know, you know what you're doing. And I'm like, I don't know.
Well, it's one of your many
and
identities,
it's so funny.
right?
So that is kind of like the one thing I resist, which is really interesting. And I love that she keeps, you know, kicking my ass about that. But it's a magical thing. But I'm really, really trying to keep it very, very true to the facts. And then any assumptions that I make, anything that I elaborate on, has to be stated that that's what that is, because I want the core of it to be really clear, so that when you do present it, say that it gets presented to coroner's court, say that it gets presented to the police in a significant way, or even the newspapers, that it's solid. It's, you know,
there won't be any mixed messages around what was evidence and what was conjecture.
So we're running out of time here, and I want to make sure that we connect people to whatever is next. I have tweeted out the link to your to Molly, but perhaps you'd like to say it for people who are just listening in, and anybody that you might like to hear from that might be listening right now.
Yeah, so it's Molly graphic novel, one word, Molly, MOLLY, graphicnovel.com, and there'll be a new post every Sunday for the next, now I guess, 45 weeks, so ending in November, and basically I welcome any dialogue around it. I am very, very respectful of people giving me suggestions and things like that. There's a lot that I already know, but I welcome any ideas, so feel free to comment on the site, and really dialogue about it. I have two women in particular I want to thank for helping me stay true to the facts, is Pamela Post, CBC journalist, and Eve Lazarus, previous journalist, author, still very much a journalist. They are meticulous at how they work and storytell. They are profound storytellers and passionate about telling historical stories. And so I want to thank them for being sort of my guiding light in that, because I can certainly get lost. It could have been just a assumption story and making it up as I go along. But this, for me, the essence of this is the truth.
Grounded it.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today, Kat.
Thank you guys so much.
So
I really
exciting.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, and we are just about out of time here. So, Luca, I wonder what's around the corner.
Me too. Essential Conversations is brought to you courtesy of Luca Halleck's Power Sorcerer.
And Rebecca Mears, certified coach.
Increase your awareness, expand your options, empower yourself. Luca can be reached at www.lucahallex.com.
I light the fires that light 1,000 more. Connect with Rebecca at catchingfire.ca.
Yep. Happy. Boing.